Store customers always wondered how he could tie rope knots so perfectly, or why he knew so much about navigation equipment. But Walter never explained. Walter Hayes had been running Hayes Hardware Store in Pine Valley for 25 years. He was 68 years old, quiet, humble man. Customers trusted him because he always gave the right advice. But Walter had some strange habits. The knots he tied weren't ordinary. They were made with military precision, professional knots. The details he gave when selling navigation equipment were strangely specific. Compass use, map reading, terrain navigation. Where had he learned this information? When selling camping gear, he knew survival techniques so well that customers were surprised. But Walter would brush off these questions. Learned it from books, he'd say, or years of experience. Actually, what Walter knew wasn't written in any book. This knowledge was learned in jungles, mountains, enemy territory, 30 years ago, in very distant countries. Hello and welcome to The Last Stand. Do you know someone who served during the Vietnam War? Share your experiences in the comments below. Walter Hayes' store was like the heart of Pine Valley. Located on Main Street, it had stood in the same place since 1952. Walter's father had opened it, and Walter took it over in 1999. The store was small but organized. Everything had its place. Tools, camping equipment, fishing gear, electrical supplies. Walter knew every product, offering customers the most suitable solutions. He was 68 years old, medium height, with gray hair. He always wore flannel shirts and heavy-duty work pants. He never raised his voice, listened patiently, and gave honest advice. But there were strange things about Walter. First, he kept everything very orderly. Military precision. Every tool had its place. Nothing was left randomly. Second was his knowledge of survival gear. When customers bought camping equipment, Walter's advice wasn't found in books. Store customers would notice Walter's special talents, especially his skill in rope work. How do you tie this knot? When they asked, what Walter showed weren't ordinary bowline or clove hitch. Professional climbing knots, tactical knots, survival knots. Where did you learn these, Walter? They'd ask. Well, learned them over the years, Walter would say. But he never explained how he learned them. When selling navigation equipment, he'd give strange details. His answers to, how do you do dead reckoning with this compass, contained military-level accuracy. The strangest part was Walter's map-reading skills. He could evaluate terrain features, elevation changes, tactical advantages on topographic maps at a glance. Walter's camping section was the best stocked in town. But he didn't just sell equipment, he also gave usage training. How do you use these water purification tablets? When they asked, Walter would give detailed explanations. Evaluating water sources, purification methods, backup plans. Where do you know all these details from? When they asked, he'd say, from outdoor magazines. But what Walter knew couldn't be learned from magazine articles. It required field experience, especially when selling first aid supplies. The medical advice he gave was very professional. His answers to how do you prevent infection in wound care were combat medic level. Customers would be surprised, but Walter would change the subject. Walter's habits at home were also unusual. He'd wake up at 5 every morning and follow international news. He'd watch news from conflict zones with particular attention. He had a workshop in his home's basement, but he didn't just do tool repair. He also worked on strange projects. Old military equipment restoration, vintage gear refurbishment. Where did he find this equipment, and why was he restoring it? His strangest habit was his physical fitness routine. At 68, he'd run 2 miles every morning, do calisthenics and endurance training. Walter, do you need to be this athletic at your age? Neighbors would ask. Body's like a machine, needs maintenance, Walter would say. On the morning of October 25, alarms rang in Pine Valley. Forest fire was approaching the town. The wind was strong and the fire was spreading rapidly. Town residents were running around in panic. There were no evacuation plans, nobody knew what to do. News from the fire department was bad. The fire would reach town in 3 hours. Highway exit routes were jammed. At that time, Walter closed his store and came outside. He assessed the situation. Wind direction, fire spread rate, escape routes. The approach he used in making this assessment wasn't that of an ordinary civilian. Walter approached the crowd gathered on Main Street. Mayor Williams was shouting in panic, "Everyone get in your cars and leave town." But Walter thought differently. Creating a traffic jam would be more dangerous. "Wait," Walter called out. His voice came out so authoritative that everyone stopped. "If we run like this, we'll get stuck on the highway. The fire will catch us." Mayor Williams got angry. "Aren't you just a hardware store owner, Walter? What do you know about fire emergencies?" Walter stayed calm. "I understand terrain analysis, and right now, the safest route isn't the highway." The crowd was surprised. Walter had never shown such leadership before. Walter visualized the town map in his mind. Alternative routes, defensive positions, rally points. "Listen to me," Walter said. "Highway evacuation is too risky. We'll use the old logging roads." "Which logging roads?" someone asked. Walter used his topographic knowledge. "The trail from the North Ridge to the pine forest. From there we go down to the valley, follow the creek." This was a route that town residents didn't know. How did Walter know it? "Is this route safe from the fire?" asked Mrs. Patterson. "Safe," Walter said with certainty. "Creek water creates a natural fire break. Valley winds push the fire upward." This meteorological and geographical analysis was very detailed. Walter began organizing the crowd. Families with children go first. Elderly people, second group. Able-bodied adults, last group. This prioritization system was military evacuation protocol. "How are you going to organize transportation?" asked the mayor. "Convoy formation. Lead vehicle does navigation, tail vehicle collects stragglers. Communication with handheld radios." Walter had planned this organization in such detail. He was like a professional emergency coordinator. "Where did you learn these things?" asked Sheriff Davis. Walter hesitated. "Common sense," he said. But it wasn't. Walter's plan worked perfectly. They established convoy formation. Walter did navigation in the lead vehicle. He coordinated all vehicles with radio communication. The old logging road really was safe. Creek water stopped the fire. Wind patterns worked, as Walter said. After 3 hours, 847 people gathered in the safe zone. Nobody was lost. Nobody was injured. Fire Chief Martinez approached Walter. "How did you plan this operation?" "You were like a professional emergency coordinator." Walter was uncomfortable. Just logical thinking. But everyone had seen that Walter's leadership was at a professional level. After the fire crisis passed, town residents began to see Walter differently. This man wasn't an ordinary hardware store owner. "Where does Walter's tactical knowledge come from?" they began discussing. Mayor Williams started an investigation. He researched Walter Hayes' background. Birth certificate, employment history, education records. Everything looked normal, but something was missing. Walter's employment history from 1,970 1,995 was unclear. It said self-employed. What job he did for 25 years wasn't clear. This 25-year gap was suspicious. Sheriff Davis visited Walter at his store. "Walter, I need to talk to you." "About what, Sheriff?" "Last week's fire operation." "You're a civilian, but you did military-level planning." Walter tensed up. "I just used a logical approach." "Walter, I've done law enforcement for 30 years. I recognize military training." "Where did you learn these skills?" Walter didn't want to answer. "Sheriff, I just run a hardware store. There's a gap in your employment history from 1,970, 1,995. Where did you work during those years?" Walter's face changed. "That's a private matter." The sheriff said he wanted to learn the truth. A week later, a special visitor came to the store, a man in his 60s with military posture, confident. When he entered the store, he saw Walter and stopped. "Walter Hayes." Walter looked up and saw the man. His heart raced. "I'm Colonel Brooks, retired. Are you Staff Sergeant Walter Hayes? 7th Special Forces Group?" Walter's world shook. After 30 years, someone had recognized him. "My old military ID was Hayes," Walter said quietly. "Cambodia operations. 1973到1975. You were my demolitions expert." Customers in the store heard this conversation. Walter Hayes was a former Green Beret. Colonel Brooks approached Walter. "Walter, you were on the Missing in Action report. In 1975, we lost contact with you in Cambodia." Walter's eyes filled with tears. I ran away." "You ran away?" "The mission was compromised. My team was eliminated. I was the sole survivor." But I couldn't save them." Walter's voice broke. "Martinez, Johnson, Campbell, I lost them all. I survived because I was a coward." Colonel Brooks shook his head. "Walter, you weren't a coward. You were a hero." "How was I a hero?" "I left my friends and ran." "Walter, I organized that mission. The intelligence was wrong. You tried to get your team out of enemy fire. There's a heroism report in your file." "Heroism report?" Walter asked. "Walter, you evacuated wounded soldiers in enemy territory for 72 hours. You saved 12 lives." Walter was surprised. But I had run from an unsuccessful mission." "The mission was successful, Walter. Intelligence targets were neutralized. You brought your team to the safe zone." The colonel pulled out his phone. "I'll call the Pentagon. I'll have Walter Hayes' military records opened." The phone call lasted 30 minutes. The colonel took notes. "Walter, the official record states, Staff Sergeant Walter Hayes, 7th Special Forces Group. Bronze Star Medal, Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman Badge, heroic evacuation under enemy fire." Walter began to cry. He had blamed himself for 30 years. Customers in the store had heard this conversation. Word spread quickly in Pine Valley. The hardware store owner, Walter Hayes, was a former Green Beret, a Vietnam War veteran, medal recipient. People began coming to the store, not just for shopping, but to see Walter. "Mr. Hayes, were you really in Special Forces?" they would ask. Walter felt uncomfortable. Those days are in the past. But the community had begun looking at Walter differently. This man wasn't an ordinary hardware store owner. Mayor Williams visited Walter. "Walter, why didn't you ever tell us?" Because I was a failed soldier," Walter said. 2 weeks later, Walter's phone rang. "Mr. Hayes, this is General Cooper from the Pentagon." Walter was shocked. "Yes, sir, we've reviewed your 1,975 service record. A great injustice was done to you." Walter couldn't breathe. "More importantly, sir, we want to make you an invitation. There's a ceremony at the Pentagon for medal upgrade." "Medal upgrade?" "Sir, your Bronze Star is being upgraded to Silver Star. The heroism level wasn't adequately recognized." Walter couldn't hang up the phone. Silver Star. This was a great honor. But this time, the honor restoration would be different. Instead of family reconciliation, Walter would reconnect with his community and fellow veterans in a new way. 3 days later, Walter received another call. This time from the Pine Valley VFW post. "Mr. Hayes? This is Commander Peterson from VFW, Post 1847. We heard about your service. Would you consider joining our post?" Walter had avoided veteran organizations for 30 years. I don't know if I'm ready." "Sir, we have 23 Vietnam veterans in our post. Many have similar stories. You're not alone." That evening, Walter attended his first VFW meeting in 30 years. When he walked into the room, 23 veterans stood and applauded. "Welcome home, brother," said Commander Peterson. For the first time in 30 years, Walter felt he belonged somewhere. The Pine Valley community organized a special recognition ceremony at the town hall. Unlike a Pentagon ceremony, this was intimate, local, and focused on community service. Mayor Williams spoke. Walter Hayes saved 847 lives during the forest fire. But more than that, he taught us what quiet leadership looks like. Walter stood before his neighbors, people he'd served for 25 years without them knowing his background. "I never wanted recognition," Walter said. "I just wanted to serve my community the way I once served my country." The audience gave him a standing ovation. But the most meaningful moment came when 12-year-old Emma Peterson, the mayor's granddaughter, approached. "Mr. Hayes, my grandfather says you're a real hero. Can you teach me how to tie those special knots?" Walter smiled. This was different from training soldiers. This was about passing knowledge to the next generation of his own community. Walter's grandson Tyler, who was 22 and studying engineering at college, came home for the ceremony. Unlike the typical estranged family story, Tyler had always been close to his grandfather but never knew about his military service. "Grandpa, why didn't you ever tell me you were Special Forces?" Tyler asked. "I thought it would make you think differently about me," Walter said. "It does make me think differently. It makes me understand why you always taught me to be prepared, why you showed me those knots, why you made me learn map reading on our camping trips. You were training me." "I was sharing what I knew," Walter said. "Grandpa, I want to learn more. Not for the military necessarily, but because this knowledge is part of our family heritage." After the ceremony, Walter was approached by the Pine Valley Emergency Management Director. "Mr. Hayes, would you consider becoming our Emergency Preparedness Coordinator? After what you did during the fire, we realize we need someone with your expertise. This wasn't about going back to military service. This was about using his skills to protect his community." Walter accepted the position. For the next 2 years, he developed Pine Valley's emergency response protocols, trained local responders, and created evacuation plans for various scenarios. When the next forest fire season came, Pine Valley was the best prepared town in the county. Walter's protocols were adopted by 3 neighboring communities. The VFW post elected Walter as their new commander. Under his leadership, the post became more active in community service, organizing disaster relief efforts and supporting local veterans. Walter also started a weekly program at the hardware store, Survival Saturdays, where he taught basic outdoor skills to anyone interested. Young scouts, weekend hikers, and even some local police officers attended. "These aren't military tactics," Walter would always emphasize. "These are life skills." If these powerful stories appeal to you, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. We continue bringing you more hero stories every day. Walter Hayes is now 70 years old. He continues running his hardware store, serves as Pine Valley's Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, and leads VFW Post 1847. And now when he talks about knots and navigation, he doesn't avoid the questions. Because everything he knows comes from 25 years of service both to his country and his community. De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. This isn't just a motto. It's Walter's way of life. And every morning when he wakes up at 5 a.m., he continues his physical training. Because a Green Beret never truly retires, he just finds new missions.